Namaste, everyone, and welcome. My name is Anjali. My wonderful guest here is Igor Vasilevitsky. We are doing our first video introduction for the Community of Holistic Practitioners group, and Igor has kindly volunteered to be the first guinea pig to do this little conversation. Before we begin, I would just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this beautiful land on which I live and work. I pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging, as well as the Aboriginal elders of other communities who may hear this in the recording or wherever it is shared in online spaces. I do also like to acknowledge my own ancestors and the wisdom keepers of all the traditions that I feel very blessed to learn from. And most important, last but not least, Shira, who is joining us for our session today. So in case you see a tail wagging in the background, that's her giving her little 2 cents worth. So Igor, welcome. We've known each other for quite a while now, I think, at least.
13 years, I'd say.
I was going to say over 10 years. So yeah, that sounds about right. I think was I working at Phoenix Institute while you were doing your transpersonal counseling course? And we've sort of been on and off in contact, I guess, since then, but not really been in a space like this for a while, maybe not since the pandemic. So welcome, and welcome to our audience members as well. I would love for you to share with us maybe a little bit about yourself, just what is coming to mind now in this present moment. Before we put the recording on, we were talking about how sometimes it's difficult to determine what level and dimension to speak to when we get asked these questions, like how are you and where are you and where are you at now? So just with what's here, to give us a little bit of an introduction about yourself.
Okay. So my background is I'll go all the way back, actually, I feel too. I was born in Eastern Europe in Belarus and came here when I was 8. So I had that transition migrant experience. I think you have too, Anjali, from me, right?
Well, yes,
Yeah.
definitely. I mean, a little bit early, later in life. So it sounds
Yeah.
like yours was quite early. What was that like at 8 years old? Quite a formative time to just, I mean, I don't know about you, but for me, the culture here in Australia is so different to the culture that I came from. And it's really, dark night of the soul kind of process, because you got to let go of everything that is familiar and known to you and step into the unknown. But as an 8-year-old, that was probably a whole other experience compared to a 28-year-old.
No, what are you talking about? I achieved my enlightenment at 9. It's all good.
Okay. All right, we're all done then. No wonder it's I'm glowing from all the light that I'm receiving through the screen.
Yeah, it's this is not the sun. This is
Yeah, that's from the inside out.
yeah, but no. I mean, when I came, as you say, at that age, without anyone holding space or without what I think is actually necessary for proper rites of passages of such a huge transition, moving from one culture to another, to honor and at the same time disidentify from certain mindsets and traditional values and ways of being that are more than just familial, that are also cultural and societal, right? And to step from a collectivistic culture, which is all about the clan and the tribe and the family, and into an individualistic culture such as Australia, where it's about autonomy, personal choices, personal freedom above the collective. So none of that happened. And so for me, it was all just repress. Of course, at that age, fit in.
Yeah.
Form an identity based on that. That's the time of, identity formation. And so, yeah, it was much later that I got to working on that to try to understand what was repressed, what was not integrated. How do I hold both cultures rather than push away from one and try to grasp onto another? Yada, yada, yada. Here I am.
Yes.
Somewhat more, perhaps, integrated in the two different cultures within my psyche.
Yeah, interesting. It really resonates for me in terms of the work that I do. I often describe it as being on both sides of culture. And what I mean by that is that group culture has its dark side, and then it's got the things that are that we can tap into as resources, and it's very supportive. And so, for example, I do a lot of the multicultural dance work, which I see as intergenerational wisdom that still exists, in us, these natural impulses to create and to make music and to move and draw. But then the dark side of that, is the shadow side of group culture is groupthink, and cultural narratives that don't fit anymore. And same for individualistic culture. So individualistic cultures are great for developing individual identity, but it's individual identity at the expense of belonging and community. And so there's these, the shadow and the light of both individualistic and group cultures. And again, the resonance around, I think when you are a migrant and you have those experiences of living in these two very different paradigms and models, it gives you the opportunity to see it, right? Otherwise, you can't see it. Like the goldfish in the water, you ask them how, what's the water like? And they're like, what are you talking about? Because they're in
To
it.
goldfish?
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
so
It's interesting, it's like, by the way, I'm doing the cultural thing of interrupting halfway through.
it's for me, it's very normal and very,
I know, and
and
that is
very
why,
appreciated.
and that
Yeah.
is and that is why I feel comfortable to do that with you. And
Yes.
this is speaking to the cultural conversation we're having. So when I'm let me take a step back. In psychotherapy, right, was invented in and by and within the individualistic mindset for the individualistic mind, right? And so Western-based psychotherapeutic model is much better in a lot of ways suited to the Western individual, but not as much for the Eastern or collectivistic cultures, let's say, more broadly. So I really have to shift my lens of how I work with people from, let's say, my background. Because from a psychotherapeutic or even from a psychiatric model, my whole family will be diagnosed in the DSM like that.
Yes.
For us, and I know there's this idea that traditionally it can be collective neurosis and trauma, and to some extent it is, but we also have to look at it, I think, contextually in terms of, well, what is within that culture that is simply not fitting into the Western model, and how do we hold that as not neurotic, but perhaps just a cultural form of traditions, a conditioning of consciousness in a specific value system that honor and help to integrate into a Western cultural mindset. Because a lot of the people that I see that are from, let's say, my background or your background or something similar, some of the issues are integrating into this culture, or some of their issues, a lot of their issues are, let's say, still having these cross-cultural tensions like I had with my family, because I'm growing up in this cultural context where it's like personal freedom and find out who I am and all this stuff. And they're going, what are you doing? Stay with us, you don't love us, all this sort of tension stuff. So a lot of the clients that I do see, some of the clients that I see occasionally, are dealing with the same cross-cultural processes, I have to widen my therapeutic container to hold both the cultural, their ethnic cultural background roots that are still speaking through them, and what they are absorbing from the culture that they are living in order to fit in and find identity and find cohesion in relationships, etc., etc. So it's a very interesting subject that you and I are talking
I
about,
know.
close to us, given our.
I didn't realize from your writing and your posts, which they're starting to go quite viral, and you're really picking up some good engagement, I guess, from the posts. But they often are about relationships and polarity and masculine, feminine. And it didn't occur to me, because you're speaking my language. I literally, when I'm working with my Indian or Pakistani or Afghani clients, all my therapeutic language, actually, I have to throw it out the window because it just doesn't, there's such a big gap between where people are at within, as you mentioned, like group culture or traditional ways of thinking versus the psychotherapeutic language that I certainly, what I've learned in courses and education and so on. And there's a big gap there that needs to be bridged. So it's really interesting to hear that from the European perspective versus, because we don't think of European cultures as group cultures, but they are. I often talk about the Greeks and the Italians, but it didn't sort of register.
It depends on where in Europe it is, interestingly enough, too, because the Mediterranean cultures, the Slavic cultures, they do have a lot more, I would say, of that collectivistic mindset. But also, there's a scale out there that classifies countries as collectivistic or individualistic. But I don't see it that way. I see it more as a spectrum, right? And so in Europe as well, the Mediterranean cultures are far more, let's say, cohesive and collectivistic than, let's say, the Slavs, right? I mean, I'm Slavic where I was born, but I'm also Jewish. So there's a combination, ethnic combination, cultural combination. But if you look at, the Western Europe and France, places like that, there is more of an onus on individual values and things like that. So it's as you know, everybody's individual. It depends on their conditioning, how much American TV they watched growing up in their own culture, how that has affected their psychic makeup. Where do they want to go? Where do they want to transition? What are they asking me for in the session? Some of them couldn't care less about what we're talking about.
Yes.
They just want to be better, let's say, more intimately open in their relationships. So the cultural context becomes a reference point, perhaps, but not the focus center point of the therapeutic work we do together. So
it's
a multi-dimensional thing. As I'm saying this, I'm hearing myself like, it's such a kaleidoscopic thing.
And also the image that comes to mind is, meeting your client where they're at and having that broader perspective, having lived in these, opposing cultures, I think just allows us to offer like genuinely non-judgment. We hear this word a lot in the psychotherapeutic world, but I think if you haven't questioned these things, because all of these things feed into unconscious bias, right? All of these things feed into the ways in which we make sense of the world, the perspectives, the lenses. And so if you're not questioning that in yourself, then you're probably not going to be able to have such a spacious holding for clients. Like an example that comes to mind, in my culture, it's very big to make decisions based on making your parents happy. Okay, but making big life decisions, choosing partners, choosing life paths because, oh no, if I marry outside my religion, my parents will be very upset. And what will, there's a saying in Hindi, log kya kahenge, which is weaponized. It means, what will people say? And what will people say gets weaponized, and it can be turned into the most toxic thing. But yes, okay, so on the one hand there's that. On the other hand, if someone's doing that with their eyes open and choosing that intentionally, like, no, you know what, this is what I value, this is what I believe, and this is true to me right now, is that I want to do this. And so, then I've got to do all the supervision and to kind of work with that internal tension that's showing up for me in relation to, these opposing but not necessarily, like this is living in paradox, right? It's like right smack in the middle. Yes, it could be good, it could be bad, but who the F am I to make that judgment, right? Like the client gets to make that decision, but we're shining a spotlight around that.
Absolutely.
So just on there, like, who are the people that you're working with now? Because I know, we've both gone on our own sort of parallel journeys and we've worked in different places and spaces. Where are you at now? What are you currently offering?
So at the moment, I mean, I work as a psychotherapist slash healer, so I want to broaden the terminology of I suppose my offerings and who I am. So my journey has been very much about, okay, I started in the psychotherapeutic side of things,
Yeah.
but I've always been kind of sensing or feeling limitations within that. So I explored in a lot of ways spirituality, my own spirituality, and developed, but also kind of just had innate sensitivities, which we could classify as, empathic or psychic, whatever you want to call it. So that informs and holds and imbues the sessions that I offer. And, just a few years ago, I started writing. And I started posting, sharing online, and those were my own insights about my own inner journey, but as well as my understanding of the insights that I had with clients individually and with couples. And that kind of just became quite significantly popular. I developed a following. My clients have kind of broad range, kind of all over the world, that will contact me, and then I organize and hold sessions with them via Zoom, and that's one-on-one as well as with couples.
Okay.
And there's, it depends, as we spoke about, what is the individual needing. We spoke about it through the lens of culture, and to hold a bigger container, but also in terms of, I'd say, there's that broader range of dimensionality when you're working with someone based on their own consciousness. It's like, which dimension of consciousness have they developed and what are they seeking to develop? So sometimes it may well be that somebody's coming and they're just starting out and they're, let's say, on their own healing journey or a journey where they're wanting to expand in some way. And so it's working very much on, let's say, a psychological level, help with making their life easier, to developing strategies, to be developing self-awareness on an intellectual level, and perhaps dipping the toe into the emotional spectrum. And then there's, people who come and they're connected all sorts of places, astral and alien and, deeper dimensions of consciousness, which are outside the framework of, let's say, classical psychotherapy. And so it's very much about my ability to, well, can I attune to that? Can I hold space for that? And
that's very much within the transpersonal model, though, right? I mean, we both did the transpersonal course, so I think everything you're saying makes sense to me within that model of, there is this whole realm of experience beyond the personal, and there are ways to work with and integrate. So it sounds like you have quite a wide range of individual clients and couples that you're working with online. Two questions. I mean, you can answer them together or separately. One is simple, like, do you have any online courses or programs or stuff like that? And the second is there any particular issues or themes that you find you're working with in supporting your clients to work through, I suppose? Yeah.
So one thing that feels quite alive to speak to, I was going to get to it in my previous monologue, but I'll get to it now. It's, it's the polarity work, the polarity dimension of consciousness, which animates the rest of the personality from a deeper place. And there's plenty of people that are in resonance with it, or are disenchanted, or are outgrowing, let's say, the confines of just the egoic psychotherapy or attachment psychotherapy or these sorts of levels of consciousness, and they're beginning to connect to these dynamics of the masculine and the feminine, and how do they relate to one another. So a lot of what I write and what I tend to work with as well is very much the masculine and feminine, which is quite interesting, because then there's a whole dimension at play between me as a man, let's say, working with a woman, and noticing my inner masculine, and let's say her feminine, or her masculine that, let's say, is manifesting in egoic tensions of self-protection and distrust of the masculine. And how do we work through that, let's say, beyond the attachment lens, rather than saying, oh, it's just daddy issues, it's a attachment, this and that, because that doesn't always work. What is actually going on? What kind of modeling, what kind of energy can I embody for the other person's energy to relate to that in our container, to our intra-therapeutic container? Yeah, go ahead. You were going to say something.
Oh no, I was just kind of nodding and humming and eyeing, because it's very rich, this area. The field that's created is very rich. There's archetypal energies that you're tapping into, which, as you mentioned, it goes deeper, right? It goes below attachment and below wounding and below trauma, and similar to the work that I do in a way, because that's why I really resonate as being a transpersonal practitioner like yourself. This idea of psycho-spiritual, and of bringing back the sacred and finding that connection to source, right? That's beyond all of these, but somehow we've got to journey in, some way to journey in. Like for me, it's the chakra system. For you, it sounds like this masculine, feminine, Shiva, Shakti, male, female, and all because it's so loaded now. But also so needed. Like that was what was really coming through as you were describing working with a female client, because there is a lot of material there, whether it's from personal trauma, family trauma, interpersonal, intergenerational. And so there's all of this, I see it as like a backlog of material between masculine, like for those who find those spaces tricky to navigate, there's a lot of that material that is just like, it reminds me of space junk. It's just stuff that's sort of floating around, and we got to navigate our way through it to actually get to the core, to the source. So it sounds really, there's like a dropping down, right? Like there's a real dropping down and a coming home.
Yeah.
And even though we're using, this is the paradox, I guess, that people think of spiritual work as ascension, but it's actually a descent, right? We've got to descend down into the wisdom of the flesh and bones and guts. So it sounds very, very juicy and exciting to hear you working with, people from diverse backgrounds and all over the world. It sounds like your writing has really opened that up, because in a way I've been a bit of a fly on the wall and witnessed you as you've started to share your ruminations and reflections, and then that seems to have sort of really built up momentum and as you say, quite a following, and people are really engaging in that. And I thought we might just, in the last few minutes, just share a little bit about your experience of sharing your words on socials, and because I know we have a lot of practitioners in this group, and from my own experience, as you probably remember as well, there's some things, some challenges that can come up in relation to practitioners sharing whatever it is that they want to share. So maybe a little bit about your process of how you went from, okay, I'm just going to put some stuff out there, to now when you get, a pretty good average of a few hundred posts and likes and comments and so on your posts. So they're very engaging, is what I've witnessed, which is not just about, like creating content for the sake of content. It feels like that you're creating content that's opening up conversations and dialogue. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, that was a journey, you know.
Mm.
It was like, in the beginning, I would say the posts were a lot more intellectualized and appealed to some people, but also probably confused many others,
Mm-hmm.
because it was about articulating, I'd say, quite deep things, quite sophisticated things in a complicated way, And so my journey's been in kind of feeling into my form of expression
Mm-hmm.
and seeing what's actually what is informing the way that I express myself. And at times it's been like, oh, it's because I'm trying to, in the beginning, it was like, I'm trying to be impervious to criticism or attack. So I got to cover every angle,
Yes,
let's say,
yes.
right? And then it was like, okay, well, if I can drop that within myself, which I did,
So
then
the self censorship in a way, right? Like, because it adds another filter to what
yeah, I mean,
we're saying.
it was protection. It was a
Yeah,
form of protection, because
yeah.
in a way you're putting yourself out there.
Oh,
You
you
know,
are
it's out
100%.
there and it's there, and then other people can come back. You don't have a certain sense of control over it, right? So you have to
Mm-hmm.
drop that as well. There's also a sense of ownership or belonging. Like, is this mine? Is this coming through me?
Mm.
What kind of, how can I drop that out there, right? And let that be as a gift. Am I selling something? Am I trying to sell something through what I'm writing? Am I trying to appear in a certain way as I'm writing it? Or is this about truth? Or is this about,
Mm.
this feels deeply, truthfully uh, healing enough to put out there? Is this going to serve somebody else? And so when you ask these questions about, around your self-articulation, as my process was, eventually it just got to a point where I was like, you know what, this feels personal, but also impersonal,
Mm.
feels channeled, and it's from my experience, but it feels also human experience. So it's depersonalized in that way. And so if it's human, then others can, on some level, probably receive and relate to it.
Mm-hmm.
So once it kind of started to be that way, it all the bells and whistles kind of dropped off. It became more about the essence of what I
Yeah.
want to say. What are the words that are, and every word is embodying that sense of what I want to actually say. So there's nothing extra as such that I feel I'm putting out there. And so when that started to happen, when I put it out there, it didn't matter to me, and it
Yeah.
doesn't actually. Uh, what will somebody else think? It doesn't have this sense of pull on, I need the likes or I need validation. So sometimes you mention some of the things people are engaged around, but then sometimes there are challenges and there are triggers, and I'm completely comfortable with that, because this isn't about me putting something out there that people are going to like, or it's going to sound nice or profound. It's just about speaking my insight to a certain aspect of investigation within consciousness that I've experienced. And if it triggers, and it often does,
Mm.
that's okay. And I'm
Mm.
willing to have an online discussion about, to clarify my intentions and to hopefully bring people to what I'm actually trying to say. So it's been a really enjoyable, beautiful process, and it's an outlet for me. And I would do it, regardless of people reading it or not reading it. It's
Mm.
something I need to do, just like I
Mm.
feel like I need to hold space for others in all these different ways. And that's been my life's journey. That's been my passion. That's been my have to do in life. And so those two things, it's like I have to offer. There's
Mm.
no choice about it for me.
Sounds like dance for me.
Yeah.
You know, it's a thing that comes through me. It's not coming from me, but in part it is a reflection of me. I've never felt any ownership around, you know, what comes through that creative impulse. It's not coming from a place of ego. You know, for yourself, I'm just hearing
For
those
me,
things
it's coming from a
reflected
place.
back.
For me, it's coming from a place of ego.
Igor.
You
You
know,
mean the hunchback, or you know?
one time I had to create like a second. I can't remember what it was. A certain other personality on like Facebook or for work. I can't remember what it was exactly.
Persona.
I called it alter ego.
There you go. So if you ever needed a pen name to give you a little bit of emotional distance
Yeah.
from the work, and you know, maybe this is for people out there who are listening, that may be one way of creating an alter Igor. And you know, writing from that place. But that was really helpful for me to hear as well, Igor, because it sounds like your writing is coming from that place of just pure creative expression. And you know, if we can allow it to be that, but also have these sort of self-reflective processes around, you know, asking yourself those questions. What am I writing this? Who am I writing this for? And am I expecting some sort of return on investment, so to speak? Or is the investment the act of writing and putting into words itself? Which I suspect it's more the latter, obviously. And I think that maybe one last thing, because I notice that you do get a lot of comments and a lot of, you know, so how do you deal with the volume? Just the sheer volume of positive and negative. Do you actually respond to the negative, or do you just say, okay, thank you, and that's it? How do you, because I know for myself, there's certainly, you know, an overwhelm trigger in that, you know, as a sensitive person as well, like yourself, sensitive to things coming at me. And when it's
Yeah.
coming at me from all these different directions, I just go, you know what, fuck this. Oh, sorry, pardon my French. I'll have to put a warning at the start of this episode. But
Now you speak French.
yeah, there you go. Va tu faire foutre. That's in French. Anyway, yes. So how do you deal as a sensitive person, as someone who is also sensitive to energies, and you know, for me, it's the projections, projection, and everyone else is like vomiting their energetic crap onto me is what sort of gets triggered as an image for me. How do you cope with that influx of comments and like positive and negative?
So I need to answer it from a multidimensional in a multidimensional way. So the first dimension is this sensitivity that we talk about. So in my experience, I used to be so sensitive that I would take everything on, or things would land, or shadow that's projected I would feel. Yada, yada.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, so what I recognized actually is that that was more of a gap in my energy, in my field, where I had to develop stronger energetic container
Boundaries, yeah,
around me.
energetic boundaries.
Boundaries, but also there's other dimensions of consciousness that I've discovered it within myself that I had to actually either stand up, bring my warrior archetype to the edges of my consciousness to create a stronger type of kingdom with faults. So part of that journey was actually to bring, you know, I think you maybe have asked me earlier about some of my other offerings. So was a course, a number of sessions, container, if you will, which was all about helping others to develop a strong, this life, the 3D mundane container to hold some of these more ethereal and subtle and refined sensitivities and energies and essences and all this sort of juicy, erosy stuff. It's like we need a strong container. There's lots of people like myself in the past that were just so open and leaking everywhere.
Leaky, yeah, so leaky.
Everywhere, and so feeling depleted and exhausted and fed on and etc. etc. But actually it was just a lacking human mundane container. So that was one of the things where now it's like, yeah, I can still reach out and feel a projection, and it's very obvious. I can feel it or I can read it. There's charge there for the person, but I also, first of all, most of the time, I feel like it's more about what was said than me personally. That's the first thing. And when I take it personal, when I used to take it personal, I'm like, well, what's that about, Igor? And I had to kind of do that piece of work where it wasn't really about me.
Mm-hmm.
But then also it's like sometimes I respond, I used to feel an obligation to respond, a responsibility to it. I don't anymore. It's like where I feel drawn and I like, oh, this person's clearly, let's say, triggered. And I can kind of sense what they're triggered about, because that's kind of what I'm talking to there, to help people perhaps move beyond a certain frame.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just triggered something up. And so generally in those situations, I try to clarify the intentions so that they can receive the medicine that I'm putting out there, because I do see it as medicine. And sometimes,
so you ask some clarifying questions, is that what it is, or something like that?
I write my clarifications of what I meant in the post where I see them misinterpreting it.
Okay, yep.
So, and so that back and forth can happen. And I don't mind doing that if I can see that there's a openness to receptivity of what I'm actually saying. And sometimes it doesn't go anywhere. And sometimes there's clearly a decision to stay within the charge. There's clearly a decision to, let's say, villainize either what I've said or what I actually think, what they're assuming I actually think, which I'm not. And despite my clarifications.
No, but I insist, Igor. Yes. I know what you're thinking better than you know what you're thinking.
Well, that's all our triggers do that, don't they? That's exactly what our triggers say. They're like, no, that person really is an ass. But and then at a certain point, if it's like not going anywhere, it's like, okay, I just leave it and step back. And at times when there's an overstepping of a boundary where it's like it gets, let's say, abusive, or let's say it's just slinging stuff for the sake of it rather than actually having a conversation or discussion, then generally I do block that person, because I also figured out that that space is my space energetically. And so it's part of my kingdom. It's part of my consciousness for me to choose who steps in and who steps out, who's welcome and who's not. Mm-hmm. And so if I was going to do that within my life, within my consciousness, within my relationships, within my home, I was going to do that there as well. Mm-hmm. So that's, my multidimensional answer to that question.
Yeah, no, that was really helpful. There's a sense of, again, it's that inner, outer, that dance between, all right, what can I do internally? What work do I need to do internally around this? And then what's the external dynamic in which I'm going to relate to the ways in which this is, being received. And I think what I like about it, what I liked hearing is that you don't feel like you need to respond to everything. And that already, narrows down the overwhelm, right? Like if you're thinking, oh my God, I've got 200 comments and I've got to respond to all of them, that's obviously going to be really exhausting.
Well, my question would be, why do you, Anjali, or anyone else experiencing that scenario experience the overwhelm? Because in my situation, right, I never actually experienced an overwhelm. So I do have people quite often come to see me for the specific purpose on getting really clear and clean and open with their gifts of sharing online or other areas in their life. And we explore these questions. It's like, well, what's happening with the overwhelm there,
Yes.
Figuring it out. So I never personally had that.
I think that was just a reflection, because there does tend to be those common themes when it comes to posting content online, and how do you deal with the negative comments, and how do you know, those are just sort of generalizations. But I think we've covered a fair bit. We covered, your psychotherapeutic roots, or rather your Slavic roots, and then the migration, and the individualistic cultures versus group cultures, and that whole integration process, getting into psychotherapy, having a bit more of a healing leaning, let's say, so not just psychotherapy but also healing. We talked a little bit about all those different sort of cultural holding spaces, and how we sort of adjust and adapt depending on what's here. You're working with individuals, with couples, doing online work, doing polarity work, masculine, feminine work, container work as well. I know you mentioned that in relation to sharing your content, but some of the things that you speak to in your content are this idea of a container with integrity. Integrity used to mean, and it still does, but integrity means there's no leaks, right? Like it's a solid structure. And then we sort of rounded that off a little bit with your process and sharing and your journey. Is there anything else that you might like to share today, just before we wrap things up?
Just the fact that we could probably talk for ages about all these different nuances and things, isn't it? But the one thing that does drop back, just in you summing up what we've spoken about and the breadth of my work and offerings, I suppose, is also archetypal work.
Yes.
Has been something that's come through quite strongly for me personally, and then with clients where that level of working with masculine and feminine archetypes at different stages, even with couples work, it's been really interesting actually at times where I'm happy to share this example with one of my couples where they were, when they met, they jumped straight into a marriage, very serious and mature, deep relationship with children. So they went straight, let's look at it archetypally speaking, to king queen
householder.
This is my kingdom, let's rule over it kind of space. And the issue that they had at the time was just this thing about romance, this gap in romance, and this inability to connect deeper on that wavelength. And so when we spoke about it, what was clearly evident from an archetypal perspective was that they had skipped the courting phase, the archetypal phase of the prince courting and wooing the princess for a while in that romantic way, serenading her under
the stars,
the rose and whatever, right? Yeah.
Yes.
But that aspect in her needed that and was still needing it. It's almost like there was this jump over the archetypal stage of relating. When we tapped into that and explored ways in which they could do that, that began to enrich their experience on that romantic level. So, archetypal work is an aspect at times that is required. I guess it just depends on the individual and what's required, or the couple that's required.
Yeah, sometimes, not sometimes, most of the time, it's a really powerful way. Working with archetypes is such a powerful way of getting beyond all the chatter and all the kind of surface level dynamics that are playing out. It's like really getting into the guts of it, right?
But also it's a way of moving around certain egoic games, especially from those that have been around the therapeutic inner development, spiritual community circuits for a long time. Their brain is wired in such ways of like, well, this is nonviolent communication, this, and this is attachment theory, that. And it's like I can see and feel
all the constructs.
They're now limited by a construct that used to help them. And so deepening of that, to step outside of that, what's needed is deeper framework, container, and a truthful energy beyond that, which is often archetypal in nature, polarity for that matter. So yeah, it's a beautiful, this is what I also love about this work, that it's like every session is completely different.
Yeah.
Every moment, often moment to moment, can be completely different with a person.
Yeah.
Things unfold differently. At time, so it's in a way, it's more of an art form than a science. And often something will come through me. I very often channel or begin to take on certain energies that is imbuing me and imbuing the container with the other person, because it's what they're needing. And then things that will come through me that I speak sometimes are completely new to me, and I love that. I'm sitting there with a client going, whoa, is that, wow, really? I'm equally astounded by the insight that's helpful in the moment. And so for me, it gets me excited, goosebumps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like we're gonna have to do another, like a
I was thinking that
proper
before. We could probably do a series
conversation. Yeah,
yeah.
like a proper conversation about process as well, about the ways in which you work, because I'm hearing a very deep resonance, and we don't often speak to this. And I don't know if I've heard any other podcast like what you just described. I don't call myself a channeler either, but I know that I can access parts of my consciousness depending on what's needed in this moment, and it comes through me, and then after the session I will be as surprised as the client and go, what the fuck just happened there, where did that come from? But I've done it long enough to trust that process, and it sounds like you're in that same space, right? You just come with full embodied presence, and what's needed comes through. And I feel like that's what we are modeling for our clients, is that trust to sit in this unknown knowingness. I mean, I think I just came up with a new terminology.
Oh, you just went full Yoda, and that happens.
I went full Zen master, the unknown knowingness of the moment.
Sometimes I'll say stuff like, I'm like, dude, what the hell?
Where did I know, I laugh with my clients.
Guru,
This is usually right at the end of the session, so that's how they'll be like, okay, this must be the last, this must be, our time must be up, because you've just dropped like some pearls of wisdom.
Sometimes I have a few clients, they're like, when are you gonna do that Igor mic drop moment where, and then the session's done? I was like, you should get a mic.
Oh, it's lovely to hear. It sounds like you're doing beautiful. It's a dance. The way I see the work with my clients, I see it and I feel it and I experience it as a co-creative choreography that is emergent in the moment. And it sounds like, this beautiful archetypal work as well. It's so dynamic. Like when you describe going straight to Queen and King, I really had that sense of, the lyrical meandering, flowing of courtship and of romance, and then do, okay, Queen King is like structured, orderly, but when we're working it archetypally, there's a dance, there's a movement, there's a flow, and it's almost like it's reconnecting people into their primal eros, the life force that's animating them, that I believe that is always moving us towards our healing, if we can just shut up long enough to listen to it and follow the flow. And it sounds like that's what you mentioned before we got on this chat, that your clients see you as kindling. That metaphor is very relevant. I think it's sort of giving fuel to the fire that's already there, but it's like it's almost gone out. It's been spat on, because culture and society and the sort of boxes that we find ourselves in really represses our natural life force, which is what is healing for everyone. And it sounds like you're helping people really tap into that movement and flow within them
Yeah,
through all of these.
that plus, you know, at times it's not that. At times it's the person's going way too deep, like I did, into those archetypal realms or higher places or deeper places. You talked about going rather than ascension and going up. We're talking about descension, right? It's
But you
like,
can't descend too low as well. Yes.
well,
Yeah.
that's the thing. It's like there are those. Well, in my situation, I went very deep, right? And then there are others that go very high. The question is who actually lands here on the surface, not high or deep. And so a lot of healers that I work with, or even therapists, or their consciousness in a lot of ways is not wanting to be here and grounded in the mundane. And so, you know, it's much better and more beautiful out there or deep down here. And having extricated myself as Persephone or Hades sort of thing from the
Yes.
places and here, you know, some of my work is very much about coming back, creating a container, because part of the reason why we, you know, aspects of consciousness can go there or there is because this container here isn't safe enough,
No
isn't
structure. Yeah.
isn't structured enough, isn't resilient enough, isn't skinned enough to survive this density for those very light and ethereal essences. So it's like, how do we use that to embody and incarnate the person fully? So, you know, but I feel like we could keep talking in so many different tangents, Angela, and just
Yes, we should.
I'm aware that you're, I think, wanting to wrap this up as well.
We will let's wrap this up also because I want people to watch it, and if it's too long, they probably won't. So thank you very much.
What are you talking about? We're so intelligent and smart.
I don't know about that. All I know is I know nothing. Like Jon Snow, I know nothing, and
like
that's.
Jon Snow, you need to take your dog for a walk outside.
I need to take, yes. Shira will be asking me for, well, she's already asking for, like she's playing dead, but she's right there. Anyway, yes, let's wrap this up. I will finish the recording. If anyone who's watching has any questions, please feel free to pop them in the comments, and Igor or myself will address them. So yes, thank you for watching. Thank you for being here, Igor, and thank you to Shira for supervising, and over and out for now.
Thank you.